I'm Emily, and I'm going to show you step by step how to do a sprinkle drip cake, like this one. I'll also show you everything that can go wrong, how to avoid it, and how you can fix it.
There are 5 steps to a sprinkle drip. Prepare the cake, prepare the drip and sprinkles, apply the drip, apply the sprinkles, and finish decorating. The first step is to prepare your cake. Build it by layering your cake and filling, give it a crumb coat, and frost it however you like. Check out my tutorial on how to get perfectly smooth frosting and sharp edges. I've put the link in the video description below. Then this is the important part. Chill it in the fridge for at least 30 minutes. Leaving it in the fridge for longer is fine too, if you want to frost the cake one day and do the drip the next day. If you're in a rush, you can put it in the freezer for 15 minutes instead, but don't leave it there for any longer. I'll show you why in the troubleshooting section at the end. While the cake is chilling, we're going to prepare the drip and the sprinkles. You can use semi-sweet chocolate, white chocolate, or candy melts for this. The ratios are 2 parts semi-sweet chocolate to 1 part heavy whipping cream or double cream, 3 parts white chocolate to 1 part cream, or 4 parts candy melts to 1 part cream. First you need to warm the cream. I like to do it in a pan on the stove so you can see what's happening. I use a medium-low heat until there are little bubbles around the edges of the pan. You can microwave it for about 10 seconds at a time if you prefer. Then add your chocolate or candy melts and shake it around or use a spoon or spatula to cover all of the chocolate or candy melts with cream. For this white chocolate ganache, I'm using half of a cup of cream and 1.5 cups of chocolate chips, which is enough for 2 6-inch cakes or a 10-inch cake. Now leave it for 5 minutes. Then stir it until it's smooth. If not all of the chocolate has melted, you can put the pan back on the stove over the lowest heat for about a minute, stirring gently to melt the last little bits. Now it's silky smooth. If you want black ganache, you can make semi-sweet chocolate ganache and add a few drops of black gel food colour. You really don't need a lot. Gel colours darken with time, so leave the ganache for at least 20 minutes to see its true colour, and it will darken a bit more once it's on the cake. If you want white, use white chocolate and add some white icing colour. Wilton makes this, and so does Americolour. It takes away the transparency and the yellowish tinge and makes it a purer white. Then you can add a tiny amount of any gel colours for pastel shades, or more for darker shades. If you have to reheat the ganache, do it very slowly over the lowest heat on the stove, or for just 10 seconds at a time in the microwave. Candy melts are the easiest way to add colour to a drip. For this one I'm using 2 ounces of candy melts and 1 tablespoon of cream, which is enough for a 6-inch cake. You can microwave the cream and candy melts together, but do it at 50% power, so the candy melts don't seize. You can mix and match the colours to create whatever shade you like. Compared to white chocolate, candy melts have a sort of sweet and sour taste, and they set much harder than chocolate ganache, so the drip tends to crack as you cut through it. Whatever you use to make your ganache, it's very important that you let it cool to room temperature. Depending on how much you warmed the cream, this could take up to 30 minutes. More on this later. While you're waiting for your ganache to cool, prepare your sprinkles. Grab a glass with a bit of water in it, and if you want, you can use a food-safe glove. You can buy pre-mixed sprinkles, or make your own mix. If you buy your sprinkles pre-mixed, if you have time and patience, it's helpful to divide them to separate any big ones from the smaller ones, because you'll apply these at different times. You can split them between plates, or it's easier to spread them out or separate them on a paper towel, so they don't move around. Now we're going to apply the drip. You can use a spoon, a condiment bottle, or a Ziploc bag, and you'll need an offset spatula. Once your ganache is at room temperature, before you apply the drip to your cake, do a test drip on the side of your pan, or a glass, or anything else with a straight side, to check the consistency of the ganache. If it runs quickly down, like it does here, it's too thin and you need to leave it longer to cool. Or if it's already at room temperature, you need to add more chocolate or candy melts. If the drips don't drip, the ganache is too thick and you need to add a bit more cream. My white chocolate ganache has come to room temperature and I'm happy with the consistency as I stir it, so I'm pouring some into a condiment bottle, which is the first drip method I'll show you, and I'm doing some test drips on the side of my pan. I like the way they drip. I'm pouring some ganache into a Ziploc bag, which is the second drip technique. and cutting a tiny piece off a corner to make it the same size hole as on the condiment bottle. Doing a test run with this too to show you, and I'll apply some with a spoon, the third method, in a minute. Okay, so starting with my bottle, I'm squeezing on a test strip to double check how the ganache is going to behave on my chilled cake. I don't want the drip to run all the way down and pool on the cake board, but I do want it to drip. I like the way this drip looks, so I'll keep going. I'm spinning the turntable slowly, holding the bottle in one place on top of the edge of the cake, so as the cake spins, the ganache is running in a line along the rim of the cake. When I want to drip, I stop moving the turntable and I move my wrist slightly outwards, so the ganache goes just over the rim of the cake and drips down the side. I hold my wrist in that same position for as long as I want, depending on how long I want that drip to be. And then I pull my wrist in and move the turntable and continue drawing this ring around the rim of the top of the cake. I'm applying exactly the same amount of pressure on the bottle the whole time, so the same amount of ganache is coming out. I'm just letting it gather wherever I want there to be a drip. This takes a bit of practice, and then it feels completely natural and you don't even have to think about it. Now I'm doing the same thing with a Ziploc bag. I prefer the bottle because it's easier to control than a floppy Ziploc bag, but it's a question of preference. And you don't have to make your drips so precise along the top of the cake. You can let the ganache run down a bit in between the drips too, like this. Now the spoon, same thing. Moving it along the rim and pausing where I want to drip, putting my wrist slightly over the edge of the cake and holding it there to let the ganache drip, then pulling my wrist in so the ganache drips onto the rim of the cake instead. Going back to my bottle to finish this drip off. And if you get any drip on your cake where you don't want it to go, you can wipe it off with a paper towel or spatula. Try wetting it slightly. And this works well because the frosting is chilled so you won't smudge it. I'm also using a bottle for this cake, and this is a candy melt drip. I love the bottle method because it's the quickest way to apply the drip, and I think it gives the most control over the drips. I like to put my cake on a turntable to apply the ganache because I like being able to hold my wrist still and move my cake instead. It's minimal effort, but also if your cake is centered on the turntable, you're much less likely to wobble off the side of the cake accidentally than if you were moving your bottle around the cake. So a turntable isn't essential, but it's definitely helpful. It's important to move quickly because you don't want the drip to set before you apply your sprinkles. If you're enjoying this tutorial, please click the thumbs up button. For this cake, I'm using a spoon with a black chocolate ganache, applying one drip at a time, and I'm not connecting these along the top rim of the cake. I'm letting them free fall. After applying the drip, I'm using my spoon to touch them up a bit, moving the ganache around to manipulate the drips before they set. If you're going to cover the top of the cake with drip, do that now before the drip sets. Otherwise, you'll see where the top and sides of the drip join. You can completely cover the top of the cake, pouring the drip on and using an offset spatula to spread it around. Just make sure you don't pour on too much ganache, or you'll end up with some unexpected drips. If you're going to pipe a frosting border on top of the cake and fill the middle with sprinkles, if you like, you can just cover the outer edge of the top of the cake with ganache, since the rest will be covered. Now we're going to apply the sprinkles. I like to scatter sprinkles on top first, while the ganache is still sticky. Then I'm going to pick up the sprinkles a few at a time with the tip of my finger, or I like to do it with a glove on. If you press a sprinkle with a dry finger, nothing will happen, but if you wet it fast, the sprinkle sticks. Now for the fun part, the sprinkle drips. If there are any sprinkles you want to place in certain places on the cake, start with those first. I'm doing these little shamrocks first because I want to spread them out evenly around the cake. This is only a good idea to do first if the sprinkles are light. If they're heavy, save them for the end. You can use a pair of food tweezers for this, or just pinch them and push them into the drip. I'm doing some little white balls and sequins now too, spreading those out intentionally. Next, I'm going to do all of the remaining sprinkles in my mix, except for the big ones which I'm saving for the end. The rest are Jimmy sprinkles, these little sticks, which I'm doing in batches instead of individually. Dip your finger into the glass of water and then press it into the sprinkles so that they stick to your finger or glove. Depending on the type of sprinkle, you'll probably get lots of them at once. Then press your finger very gently into the drip, angling it and moving it up and down the drip to press all of the sprinkles into the drip. If your sprinkles don't stick in batches like this, you can continue to apply them individually. It's more precise that way, it just takes longer. If your finger is too wet, the sprinkles might bleed onto the glove or your finger and onto the drip, so shake your finger off a bit after dipping it into the water. You just want it to be damp, not really wet. At the beginning, you'll have to press the sprinkles very, very gently into the drip, because with too much pressure, you'll indent the drip. But as the drip starts to set, you'll have to push the sprinkles in a bit harder. You'll notice because if you're not pushing hard enough, they'll start to fall off as you press them on. If you get any sprinkles onto the frosting around the drip, you can take them off with your fingers or tweezers or just push them over into a drip. Once you're happy with the coverage of the small sprinkles, the ganache will have started to set, and now is the best time to apply the bigger sprinkles. These are heavier, so if you apply them straight away, they'll slide down the drip because of their weight. If there are patches where the sprinkles are too clumped together, or there aren't enough sprinkles, you can reposition individual sprinkles using tweezers before the drip sets. You can also apply all of the sprinkles individually with tweezers instead of your finger, if you want them to be more spread out on the drips, or if you want to decide exactly where each one goes. You can play around with this technique. Try applying the drip to just a small section of your cake, like this one here, or use different colours for different parts of the drip, or even a different colour for each drip. Have fun with the sprinkles too. Here I'm using all the same black shimmery nonpareil sprinkles to give this black drip some sparkle. You could use different colours or shapes of sprinkles on each drip. There are so many possibilities. Finally, you can finish decorating your cake. Wait for your drip to set, ideally in the fridge for about 30 minutes, before adding decorations, so that any decorations or frosting details don't slide around, especially if you're going to transport the cake. Try some frosting swirls. These are done with a Wilton 1M tip, or a rope border. I'm using a Wilton 8B tip for this one, and for this one I'm using 2 different shades of pink in separate piping bags, both with a Wilton 1M tip. Of course, you can add even more sprinkles if you like. Now some troubleshooting notes about sprinkle drips. If your drips are running too far down your cake, or your sprinkles are sliding down the drips and pooling on the cake board at the bottom, it could be because of 3 things. The first problem could be the consistency of your ganache. Double check the ratio and do the test drip on the side of your pan, and if the drips are moving too fast, consider adding some more chocolate or candy melts to your ganache. The second problem could be that your cake isn't chilled. I'll show you what that looks like with this cake, which is at room temperature. I've used the standard 3:1 ratio for this white chocolate drip, and checked the consistency of my drip on the pan, but since my cake is warm, the drips are running too far down the cake, and eventually they'll hit the cake board at the bottom of the cake. As I'm putting my sprinkles on, they're sticking to the drip, but as the drip slides down the cake, the sprinkles do too, so they'll end up in piles at the bottom of the cake too. The cake needs to be chilled in the fridge, so that the drips slow down as they drip down the cake. You can put the cake in the freezer for 15 minutes, but don't forget it there. If you wait too long, the cake will get too cold, and when you take it out and apply the drip, the cake will sweat as it thaws at room temperature. The same thing can happen if you take the cake out of the fridge and decorate in a hot room. That's the third problem, and I'm going to show you that here. This is a cake that I chilled in the freezer, but got distracted and left it there for a few hours. Now, as I'm applying the sprinkles to my drip, the drip is setting because the cake is cold, but as the cake thaws, I'm getting little beads of condensation on the frosting, which makes the drip slide down to the base of the cake. As a side note, this is what happens when you put the big sprinkles on first. They're too heavy for the fresh, sticky drip to hold in place, so they slide down and get covered in drip as they go, and they'll either end up coated in drip so you can't see their shimmeriness, or they'll slide all the way down and fall off the cake. Do you see this drip here slowly sliding down, even after it's set? And this strip here has split apart as the bottom half slides down with the condensation. Here's another one that's split apart, There goes another one. Definitely not ideal. You can touch these up by dripping on some more ganache to bridge the gap between the split drips, and then putting the cake in the fridge to prevent more condensation forming. But it's much easier to just have the cake at the right temperature to start with. So either chill your cake in the fridge, or set a timer if you're going to freeze it, and make sure it's nice and cool in your kitchen or wherever you're decorating. If something does go wrong with your drip, don't lose hope. I didn't like the drip on this cake, so I scraped it off with a frosting smoother, and now I'm using an offset spatula to gouge out any sprinkles that are wedged in the frosting. Now, because the cake is chilled, it's easy to spread on some more frosting to fill in the holes on the sides and cover up the messy top. And then smooth the frosting on the sides, tidy up the top, and voila! A pretty watercolour cake, ready for a new drip.
I hope this gives you the confidence to try this fun technique. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments below. And please tag British Girl Bakes in your photos on Facebook and Instagram so I can see your creations. Thanks for watching!
If you've enjoyed this tutorial, please click the thumbs up button and subscribe to my channel for new cake decorating tutorials every week.